Greetings. Welcome to a special evergreen edition of the Steve Deace Show. That would be me. I am Steve Deace. He's Todders, and he is Aaron McIntyre. We are not live, but this show is new. If it's an evergreen, that means you're getting an original program, but we took the day off. But of course, we are this year with our evergreens, we're doing something a little bit different, sort of Joe Rogan style, in-depth, long-form conversations with people who have interesting angles and things that we think you need to consider, that it takes more than just a 10 or 15 minute chat to dig into. And of course, also our focus this year happens to be a lot on theology. And that's going to be the focus of the conversation that we are going to have today. But first, a reminder that we are brought to you by our friends, as we are each and every day, at First Cup Coffee Company. They have a flavor for every freedom-loving American, but don't just get it for that reason. Right? Do it because it's great coffee. Don't take my word for it. I'm not a coffee drinker. Aaron is. It's a food group to Aaron. He drinks this stuff all the time. So Aaron, give us a quick review of what you thought when you tried First Cup Coffee Company.
I've had a number of their flavors, the John Hancock. I've had the Boston Tea Party as well. My favorite is the Pharaoh. That's a dark roast. It's really good. That's my favorite roast of coffee. I ordered a box of K-Cups for my use here during the show. Don't make the mistake that I made. Don't forget to use the promo code, which is Deace, right?
Yeah.
Deace.
Code is Deace to get 10% off when you go to firstcup.com. They put the roast date right there on every bag. They can try to get it to you as fresh as possible. 10% off when you go to firstcup.com and use the code Deace. And if you subscribe, you'll get an additional 10% off as well at firstcup.com, code Deace. We're going to spend a few segments with our guest, whom I will introduce here in a matter of moments. And then the final segment of the show, segment 4, Todd and Aaron, you guys will come in and provide us your instant feedback and discussion points of what we hope anyway will be an interesting conversation to be had here over the course of the next, hour plus with our guest. His name is Gary DeMar. Gary has written numerous books. One of them, by the way, had a huge impact on the way I do this show. So if you do or don't like this show, he is at least one of the people to blame. Myths, Lies, and Half-Truths, How Misreading the Bible Neutralizes Christians. That was a book I read about a year before we took our show nationally from Des Moines, Iowa, WHO Radio, to the Salem Radio Network, and now the Blaze. So I appreciate his influence there, but he's written lots of books on eschatology, meaning the study of the end times, other theological matters. He is a commentator with American Vision. You can check them out at americanvision.org. That's americanvision.org. And we welcome Gary to the program here today, brother. It is good to have you with us, Gary DeMar. How are you?
I'm doing well. I get blamed for a lot of things. It's nice to be blamed for something good these days. So that's
well, depending on what Google results you get, it's good or bad, right, brother, where my name is concerned. So I hear you. All right. So Gary, I want to give you kind of the background of why I thought of you when we were sitting down at the beginning of this year, and it's an evergreen. You know, you and I are recording this conversation early in the year 2024. This thing could run, around St. Patrick's Day, could run at Halloween. We have no idea when this episode will air, so I'll try to keep the conversation as broadly themed as possible. But just to give you a specific reason why I thought of you when we got together as a staff and thought, hey, let's do long-form conversations, and I suggested your name because a church we used to attend, great little church, and the pastor who's now retired, Pastor Bob, he was an MP in the military, about 6'4" and an MP, no shrinking violet. All right, this is not a guy that backs away from any form of confrontation, which is a rarity in today's American pulpit. And so he thought one day, I think it'd be interesting if we had our church kind of study all of the various eschatological views. He was a very committed premill dispensationalist, like a lot of the American pastorate is today. But, we would have discussions about things. I'd bring him research of different views that I had done from people like you, for example. He was very curious and thought, this would be kind of a come now, let us reason together thing, that we should do this as a adult Bible fellowship for Sunday school for adults and, get our elders and deacons and seasoned, believers in there and hash these things out. It would be an interesting conversation. And so the very first one was discussing some of the views of postmillennialism. And I have to tell you, Gary, people lost their dang minds. I mean, people, and this is a small church, everybody was very tight, very close, and people look like we just let Arius or Marcion into the church. I mean, people lost it. I mean, I went to lunch with one of our elders afterwards, who told me that the two most important books in his life are the Bible and Hal Lindsey's The Late Great Planet Earth. And I said to him, well, you know that Hal predicted that Jesus was coming back in 1988, and brother, it's now 2008. You know, what does the Bible say to do to people who, are false prophets, make wrong predictions? And man, he got so mad at me at a restaurant, I thought we were going to throw hands right there. I thought we had to turn the other cheek right there, Gary. That's how passionate people get about these things. And I know that you have experienced that yourself. So I want to start there. Gary, aside from already the amount of hate and vitriol you will receive by being a spirit-filled believer in Jesus Christ, why did you decide to take on even more so by challenging people's views on these topics? Why do you hate your life, Gary, is basically my first question.
I keep telling people that I really do enjoy this because I've been doing it for, I became a Christian in 1973 at the height of the Late Great Planet Earth craze, which came out in 1970. And at first, my changed life was in order. I was involved in athletics. I was on a track and field scholarship at Western Michigan University. Athletics was my life at that time, and my life wasn't going anywhere. And so the first thing was to get my life in order, becoming a Christian. Just had no knowledge of the Bible or anything like that. And as I started reading the Bible, I began to understand that the Bible should be applying to every area of life. And that was my foray into this. But one of the obstacles I kept coming up against with lots of people was they were saying, oh, we're living in the last days. Israel became a nation again in 1948. You mentioned Hal Lindsey on page 54 of the first edition of his book. He made the statement based on Matthew 24:34, where it says, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. A generation is 40 years. You add 40 to 1948, and so the rapture of the church should take place sometime between 1981 and 1988. And he did an interview in Christianity Today magazine, 1977, and the person who was interviewing him, Ward Gasquet, asked him, said, well, Hal, but what if you're wrong? And he says, well, there's a split-second difference between being a hero and a bum, and if I'm wrong, I guess I'll be a bum. So that was Hal Lindsey's own assessment of his work. But he's still around, and people are still predicting that we're living in the last days. We're far removed from the 1988 essence of when the end was supposed to come. The people are still when Ukraine when the Russia entered Ukraine, this Ezekiel 38 and 39 came up. So anyway, my whole thing was in dealing with how the Bible applies to every area of life. One of the obstacles was that, hey, if we're living in the last days and the rapture's right around the corner, why are we bothering with economics and politics and education? Because it's all going to fall apart. You don't rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. And so why bother? And so I wrote a series of books in the 1980s called God and Government, that how the Bible applied to every area of life, not just the politics. And eschatology still is one of the main focuses of lots of people that I think keeps them out of being involved in the world in which we live, because they don't see any hope, any near time hope for any change that's going to take place, because Jesus is coming. He's right around the corner.
I've told this story before, but it's been a few years. When I was still a local host here in Des Moines, I was driving around on my lunch break and listening to the Christian station. I was on the big 50,000 watt blowtorch, WHO, and I'm listening to our Christian station over lunch. And a woman is hosting the show there, and she's talking about some dismaying things happening at the state legislature. and urging her audience, comprised a lot of women who are stay-at-home moms, hey, call your legislator, let them hear your voice, let them know that you feel very strongly about this. And then she said, however, we also know that since we are living in the Laodicean age of the church, that these sorts of this sort of wickedness and evil will become even more prevalent as the days go on. And I thought to myself, now this isn't an argument one way or the other, because it doesn't necessarily make sense for political activism, doesn't mean your eschatology is or isn't sound, okay? But it did seem to me, though, from a messaging standpoint, that you're telling people to drive a car by hitting the gas and the brake at the exact same time. And you don't usually go anywhere when you do that. You just spin your wheels, right? But so, the idea that we have to be heavily involved, but in the end, we lose. So I don't know. I mean, if I'm a distracted American and I've got a million things going on, not to mention one addicted to comfort, and you're telling me that taking on the added umbrage of cultural engagement and political activism will gain me nothing, that I will essentially take on all of the hate that I will receive for doing so. Aunt Petunia is going to light up my Facebook page, and other members of the family will shun me at Thanksgiving. And in exchange, it won't mean anything because I'm just going to lose anyway. Then what would be the point of that, right?
Yeah, and of course, their attitude about losing isn't, we're not going to lose because Jesus is going to return and take us to heaven in something called the rapture. So we're not going to lose. But, when I became a Christian in 1973, you're looking at that was 50 years, more than 50 years ago. You look what's happened in 50 years because of this eschatological age idea. And you got Christians, a couple of generations of Christians who have arisen with the same attitude, and they have no perspective of history. They have no idea that people have been using the same Bible verses that are being used today to predict what the end was going to come. In 1926, by Oswald J. Smith, wrote a book, said that Mussolini was the Antichrist. He gave all the passages referencing that. You had period French Revolution. You can go back through 2,000 years of people using the same Bible verses with the impetus on the fact that they were living in the last days. Something is wrong with the way that we are interpreting many of these Bible passages. And it keeps setting us back. And you've got people who are 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, who have no idea about what Hal Lindsey wrote in 1970. And if you read his book, he made the prediction. He said 1988 was going to be the day. I debated Dave Hunt, I think like 9 times. He made the same type of predictions. I have a library full, probably one of the largest private libraries dealing with Bible prophecy. And we published a book called The Day and the Hour, which is a litany, a definitive statement of 2,000 years of predictions using the same Bible verses that people are using today. I just think there's a better biblical, more standardized way to understand these Bible passages that I believe would revolutionize the mindset of Christians today and begin to take on the world in which God has called them to do.
One of the things that I have pointed out, and we're going to get in, I want the audience to know, over the course of this conversation, we're going to get into the details of these various terms. What is postmillennial, premillennial, dispensationalism? What do all these terms mean? What are their origins? We're going to get into all this stuff and try to educate you as much as possible and make up your own mind. I'm not entirely even sure necessarily what my own eschatology is, having studied all of these views just enough to be confused. Okay, so we're going to go through as many of all this stuff as we possibly can. But I remember my wife is a Christian counseling degree from Liberty, and she did her undergrad to get her seminary degree from Luther Rice Seminary in Atlanta. And that's associated with the great Charles Stanley. It's a great seminary, did a great job. I went through a lot of her courses and stuff with her, and she had to take a course on eschatology. And what I was fascinated by is the professor who taught eschatology at Luther Rice Seminary in Atlanta. He opened the class the very first day, and I'm quoting here by saying, "I have the same eschatology Jesus did." All right, and so that therefore any other views you have are wrong. and he began to preach, according to the hymnal of the Schofield Bible Notes, basically, and the Plymouth Brethren view, okay? And we'll tell people what those things mean and what those are as we get into this conversation. But when she got to the end of her class, she had to write a final paper that 70% of her grade depended on. And since I was right in the middle of doing a bunch of research on these various eschatological views at the time, and I had a few friends who were very post-millennial and had sent me books on theonomy and a bunch of stuff, and I said, you know what, man, everyone else is going to write a paper kissing up to your prof. All right, he strikes me as the guy that will respect it if you take a contrarian view. So here's what we need. Here's what you need to write, and I've got the books in my library to help you do it. All right, you need to write. This is the title of your paper. Okay. Why there would have never been a United States of America without post-millennialism and theonomy. All right, that without that viewpoint, America would have never existed. That basically the eschatology of the Puritans, the viewpoint of the Puritans, and without it, there's no America. So she did that. She read the stuff in my library, wrote her paper about that, and I was right. Everyone else in that class, man, basically just gave helmet stickers and waved palm branches at the prof. She took a completely contrarian view, and he loved it so much and thought it was so snotty that he did give her 100%. So see, there is an ability for these various groups and camps to come together and reason together and have fun having some of these debates. They don't always have to be knockdown, drag-out, Gary.
Oh, I agree. I think what we have in common is that we do have the Bible. I believe the Bible's the Word of God. I don't believe there are any mistakes in the Bible. When Jesus said he was going to return before that generation passed away, I have to believe it. In fact, that's what happened when I became a new Christian. I started reading through Matthew's Gospel. As I got to, and remember, this is during the heyday of the late great Planet Earth, where Hal Lindsey's book sold 26 million copies. This was the talk of the town for 10 years at least. And so as I'm reading through, I came across a passage in Matthew chapter 10, verse 23, where Jesus says to his disciples, you will not finish going through the cities of Jerusalem until the Son of Man comes. And again, I'm ignorant of the Bible. I didn't know enough to question anything, but that just always was a head scratcher for me. Then in chapter 16, Jesus says, there are some who are standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. And I didn't know how to fit that into it either. So I get to Matthew chapter 24, verse 34, and it says, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. And I had just read earlier in Matthew's gospel that the phrase this generation was used on a regular basis, and it always meant the generation to whom Jesus was speaking. Well, again, I didn't know enough to question this. It was always something in the back of my mind. But as I was in seminary at this time, and as I began to study more and wanted to see how the Bible applied to every area of life, I had to deal with the eschatology side of things. And so if you're going to put Jesus at the center, you have to let the Bible interpret itself, and you have to let the words of Jesus, take them at face value, even though they might go up against your own perspective. And if need be, you have to change your perspective. And that's what happened to me. That's why I've been writing on eschatology for more than 40 years, answering these objections, mostly because people have distanced themselves from trying to change the world in which we live because they don't see any hope for it.
All right, let's define some terms. All right, so before we decide which direction on the map we're going to go, let's have the legend of the map. Let's define those terms, okay? So futurism and preterism, and yes, we could write volumes of books, and people like you do. We're talking to a very broad audience. There's distinctions within each of these things, but just broadly defining these two terms, preterism and futurism. How would you define those two terms?
Okay. The word preterism is from the Latin meaning past. And so if you're a Christian, and it's been said that there are 300 or so prophecies in the Old Testament that have been fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus in the New Testament, you are a preterist. That is, you believe those prophecies have been fulfilled already. They're in our past. Although the ramifications of the work that Jesus did has implications for us today. So a preterist is somebody who simply believes that when a prophecy is given and it's been fulfilled, that person is a preterist. But you get into the New Testament, and those three verses I gave, they seem to indicate that there was some prophetic eschatological event that was within that particular generation's time of fulfillment. And I believe that those passages actually refer to events leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. That's what Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21 are all about. So that makes me a preterist on those passages. Now, futurists would say, no, those passages are still yet to be fulfilled. The problem with that position on those passages and others, it disregards the audience relevance, to whom was Jesus speaking, and the timing element. If you interpret the Bible literally, that is letting the Bible interpret itself, you have to maintain that those three passages refer to events that were to take place to that particular generation. A futurist just says, well, maybe some of those things were fulfilled, but there's still going to be these things are going to be fulfilled again, but in a little different way. So there's a difference between preterism and futurism.
Would you consider, so you know what, actually, let me take a step back. When do you believe Revelation was written, Gary?
I believe the book of Revelation was written before the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
See, this is a key point that I think a lot of people, pardon my interruption, just again for the layman, there throughout church history, and you can correct me on this, there's been a lot of debate. When was this book written? Was it written in 90 AD? Was it written in 60 AD? Okay, so because whether or not it was written before the events of 70 AD, and I want you to discuss why that was so important, okay, historically, but it goes a long way probably into whether or not you have adopted either a futurist or a preterist view of this. Fair?
Yeah, I would say so. Sure. The book of Revelation, it's kind of funny. You run into people, they become a Christian, and the first book they read is the book of Revelation.
Right.
And yet you had some of the finest scholars throughout history who've written commentaries on almost every book of the Bible. And the one book of the Bible they didn't write a commentary on was the book of Revelation, because it's not an easy book. But here's just a couple of things. The very first verse of the book of Revelation, so chapter 1, verse 1, it states that these things must soon take place. Verse 3 says the time is near. Chapter 22:10 says the time is near. So what do you do with those passages? Take them every time, again, you go through the New Testament, look up the same word in other contexts, and you will see that every time those words near, shortly, quickly are used, they always mean near, shortly, and quickly. Then you get to chapter 11, and John is told to measure the temple. Well, wait a minute. We know, no one disagrees with that the temple was destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. Jesus predicted that it would happen in Matthew chapter 24. It was destroyed in AD 70. These events are supposed to take place soon. And these things, Jesus is coming quickly, it says. And John is told to measure the temple, wait a minute. If he's told to measure the temple and that the temple was destroyed in AD 70, how could the book have been written in AD 95? And that's a real brief response to that argument. But that's essentially the argument. And there's good scholarly background from some of the finest scholars out there who maintain that the book of Revelation was written around the AD 66. Ken Gentry has written probably the definitive book on the dating of the book of Revelation, called Before Jerusalem Fell. So there's a lot of information dealing with that. But I like to stick to the Bible. These things must shortly take place. The time is near. John is told to measure the temple. Seems to me that the book of Revelation is dealing with those events in a very symbolic way.
So the Emperor Titus had, I think it was Titus, correct, had Jerusalem destroyed in AD 70. Do I have my history right there? Okay.
You do, yes.
All right,
yes.
and so this is when the temple is destroyed as well, and that's all that exists is the wall that is part of what Herod the Idumean, what he constructed when he expanded the temple, when he took over as tetrarch of the area. Is my history still correct on all of that so far?
Yeah, everything that wall is more of a retaining wall. It really was not part of the temple. And remember, in Matthew chapter 24, well, chapter 23, you really have to read chapters 21, 22, 23, and 24 to get the whole picture. But I'll just stick Matthew 23. Jesus says to the religious leaders after he indicts them, he says, "Your house is being left to you desolate." Then Jesus comes out of the temple, and you get to chapter 24. And the disciples say, "You mean this temple?" And Jesus said, "Yeah, you see this temple? Not one stone here will be left upon another. They will all be torn down." And so they said, "When is this going to happen?" And then he goes through and gives some will there be wars and rumors of wars and famines in various places and false prophets, the abomination of desolation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then verse 34, he says, "This generation will not pass away until all these things take place." Was the temple destroyed so that not one stone was left upon another? Absolutely. Nobody disagrees with that either. So it's really for the person who just sticks to the Bible and lets the Bible speak for itself. This is not that difficult to understand, but it's not sensationalistic anymore, Steve. You know, talking about a great stock I invested 20 years ago is one thing, but to talk about a stock that's going to do well for the next 20 years is much more exciting. To talk about things that have already happened is interesting, but to talk about what's going to happen in the next year or the 5 years or 10 years and so forth is much more exciting. And I think that's where we are today in terms of eschatology. Everybody's out there he's telling everybody all these things that are going to happen. But if, again, most people are too young to know that the people had made the same predictions in the 1970s and long before that. And people don't have any knowledge of that. I do, you do, and lots of other people do as well. But the popular audiences out there do not study the Bible for themselves.
Hey, before we get further into the conversation, though, a word about our friends at Constitution Wealth. They're the Patriot's Choice in Wealth Management. So let me ask you something. Do you avoid, whenever it's possible, shopping with businesses who are attacking your values? Now, that can be difficult to do, but a lot of you in our audience are trying to do exactly that when you can. Why not apply the same thing to your investment and retirement funds as well? And that's why you want Constitution Wealth. They can help you build a solid investment plan because hopefully you'll still get to retire someday, so you can reduce your investments in ESG, DEI, and other woke schemes that go against your values. You can also put to work maybe the biggest weapon you have in the culture war, your money and your voice. So this is an opportunity to build the parallel economy together by working with an investment firm comprised of professionals who are patriots just like you. Why work with anyone else? Sign up for a free consultation today at constitutionwealth.com/blaze. That's constitutionwealth.com/blaze. I've got 1 minute for a tough question. Why don't you think there's any prophetic significance to this current iteration of Israel, as many others do?
I'm not sure. I believe, since I'm a postmillennialist and we haven't defined that yet, but I believe that the Jews are going to come to Christ. I believe that the Muslims are going to come to Christ. I believe that the Chinese are going to come to Christ. So I don't see any problem with looking at Israel today as being something related to what the Bible has to say.
But you don't believe any countdown clock was began on May 15th, 1948. You don't believe that?
No, I do not. No.
Okay.
No.
All right, so we're going to take a quick break here in just a few minutes. I'm going to give Gary a heads up. Not that he doesn't know. He's done all these debates with people and names you know a million times over the years. But just to give him a heads up, and all of you in the audience, we're going to get into, when we come back, these millennial viewpoints. There's three that are preeminent within a lot of people's knowledge of current or historic Christianity: premillennialism, amillennialism, and postmillennialism. And then where does the rapture if at all, fit into these events? And then what I happen to personally think is the best argument for a futurist view, and I want to get Gary's take on it. We'll get into all this and more with Gary DeMar from American Vision in a moment.
The Steve Deace Show.
All right, so all the shows I haven't done my entire career on eschatology, because it drives people insane when we talk about it, we're just gonna do it all in one day today. All right, Gary DeMar, author of numerous books on this topic. He's got a library of them at Amazon if you can head over there right now. And also from American Vision joins us now. All right, so Gary, let's continue on here in this special evergreen episode. Let's again redefine some terms. What is covenantal theology and what is dispensational theology?
From our previous segment, I just want to go back to the Israel deal.
Okay.
Because we're going to talk about dispensationalism a little bit as well. But modern day dispensationalism believes that the Jews living in Israel, 2/3 of them are going to be slaughtered during the period of the Great Tribulation, which a lot of Christians who hold to the dispensational view do not know or do not understand. That's the position. And there was a time during World War II where dispensational scholars took what was called a hands-off approach to what was happening to the Jews in Europe, because they believed that was a prophecy that was yet to be fulfilled based upon Zechariah chapter 13. And since I believe that that prophecy was related to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, there was a 40-year period that Jesus gave based upon what he said in Matthew chapter 24 as a warning that when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies in Luke chapter 21, head for the hills, get out of town, leave the city of Jerusalem.
And the Christians did.
The Christians did. And they were warned. The Jews were warned for 40 years about that. Well, modern day dispensationalism is not making that warning at all. In fact, they're encouraged when they see more and more Jews move to Israel. So I believe that aspect of dispensationalism is dangerous, because it looks to see the things that are taking place in the world today is to be Israel-centered. And so Russia is supposed to be an end-time bad guy. China is supposed to be an end-time bad guy. All the nations surrounding Israel are end-time bad guys, and they're going to go in there and try to destroy Israel. And of course, their view is, well, yeah, my 2/3 of the Jews are going to be destroyed, but a remnant of them is going to be saved. And I just think a lot of modern-day foreign policy that's being pushed by many Christians today is dangerous, because I believe that prophecy had nothing to do with what's going on today. And Israel needs to be treated just like any other nation, both the good and the bad, positive and both negative sanctions, just like any other nation. So that's just something I want to throw in there, just so you know, the most popular prophetic view today has some serious problems with it in terms of not only the things I already went through in the first segment, but this end-time scenario in the place of Israel in Bible prophecy.
So that's actually a good segue to the question I already asked you. Let's start at the beginning here as we start defining terms. What is covenantal theology and what is dispensational theology?
Covenantal theology, you make a covenant, you make an agreement. But in terms of covenant theology, it's a one-way agreement where God makes a covenant with Abraham. He made a covenant with Abraham. And in that covenant, he told about how Abraham would prosper and that he would be the father of many nations, which would have included the Gentiles. And that's exactly what you find happening in the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts, because there's a big debate. Are the Gentiles included in this? And the Apostle Paul said, absolutely, yes, they're included in this. And that covenant it was fulfilled in the person and work of Jesus Christ and continues to move throughout history, because I wasn't born a Jew. And I have been grafted into an already existing Jewish ecclesia, part of that Jewish covenant that was made with Abraham. Dispensational theology divides up biblical history. It divides it up so much that supposedly there are two different redemptive programs, one for the Jews and one for Israel. And supposedly the prophecy clock stopped when the Jews rejected Jesus as the promised Messiah, which, by the way, the Jews did not reject Jesus as the promised Messiah. The religious leaders did. The people in Israel at that time, there were Jews living in Jerusalem from every nation under heaven when the gospel was preached, and tens of thousands of Jews embraced Jesus as the Messiah. It was always the religious leaders who were the ones who opposed, just like they opposed Jesus, they opposed the gospel, opposed Paul, tried to have him killed. And so what the dispensationalists said is, well, since these Jews rejected Jesus as the Messiah, the prophetic clock stopped. And so we are living in what is called a parenthesis, what they say is a church age, and that God will not deal again with his covenant people again, Israel, until the rapture of the church. So right now, according to the dispensational view, the Bible says nothing about, and you started off the early segment about we're in the Laodicean age. Mm-hmm. That's impossible if you're a dispensationalist. Those 7 churches that are mentioned in Revelation chapters 2 and 3, the dispensationalists believe that we are that the rapture is an any moment event. It could have happened any time of the past 2,000 years, and it can happen any time in the next 2,000 years. We're not in any particular prophetic age according to dispensationalism. We are in a parenthesis. We are in kind of a prophetic limbo until the rapture of the church takes place. Now, if some of this sounds complicated to people, well, I agree with you. It's extremely complicated, and nobody could figure this out on themselves, by themselves. You have to listen to other people tell you what this means. My point is, stick to the Bible on all this. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to do this. I ran through a couple of verses. Stick with what those verses have to say. Pay attention to the audience. Pay attention to the time indicators. Compare Scripture with Scripture. You will not be able to come up with a dispensational system. So the covenant theology simply says God fulfilled his promises, made his promises to Abraham. He fulfilled his promises to Abraham. The dispensationalist says there are two covenants out there, one made with Israel, one made later on with the church as kind of a redemptive plan B. I'm just sorry, that's just not found in the Bible anywhere.
Do you believe in the rapture?
As it is described today and explained, absolutely not. This whole church age thing, the rapture is dependent upon this idea that there are two peoples of God, that God will only deal with the
church is
again,
removed so he can now finish the redemptive plan of Israel, basically.
Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
But Steve, you have to go to Daniel 9 verses 24 through 27. You've got to put a gap between the 69th and the 70th week. We're in that gap right now. That gap is pushed into the future to 7 years. Supposedly, there are 5 rapture positions. There's a pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib, partial rapture, pre-wrath. But there's nothing in Daniel 9 that says anything about the prophecy clock stopping at the end of the 69th week and then starting up at the 70th week and a gap between the 69th and 70th week. Again, this is all a fabricated system that had its origins in the 19th century.
Let's talk about those origins. Who are the Plymouth Brethren? And what's the Schofield Bible?
The Plymouth Brethren was a group of Christians who, out of it, grew this dispensational system. John Darby was part of all that, and it was all based upon this idea that there's a distinction between Israel and the church, and two redemptive people of God. And one little side note here: the word church is not there's a Greek word for it, ekklesia. We get the word ecclesiastical from it. It's a common word. When the Old Testament was translated from Hebrew into Greek, the Hebrew word kahal was translated as ecclesia. You get into the New Testament, when you see the word ecclesia, that's not a new thing. The first ecclesia in the book of Acts, first church in Acts chapter 5, verse 11, was made up exclusively of Jews. So this idea of there being two redemptive peoples of God is what the Plymouth Brethren started, and it was codified in the Scofield Reference Bible that came out at the first part of the 20th century. And the Scofield Notes became, I believe, as an extra biblical grid on how people interpreted the Bible. Scofield said, or in Scofield's note on this, Scofield says this. People got away from reading the Bible for themselves and became dependent upon reading the notes in the Scofield Reference Bible.
How much of the early 20th century embarrassments like the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee, for example, and other embarrassments kind of drove much of what was known back then as the fundamentalist church, kind of drove them out of public view. Many of the more what we now call mainline Protestant churches went very left wing during this era as well, and so it was the churches that were influenced by Mooney Bible and the Scofield Bible notes. Weren't those most of the churches that kind of held on to orthodoxy? And since they were the ones that held on to orthodoxy, while a lot of the mainline Protestant denominations went what we would call today woke or liberal or heretical, a lot of people listening to this, even people that are seasoned saints, much older than I am, and I'm 50 now, they're probably hearing a lot of this for the first time because a lot of the branch of orthodoxy in American, particularly Western, but particularly American Protestantism came out of this one particular vestige that was influenced by the people you're talking about. Yes or no?
Yeah, that is true. There was a book that I think it was written in 2023 called The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. And it goes through this history. It's a masterful book. It's available, of course, on Amazon like everything else. The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. And you're right. And what we find, fundamentalism was defined in terms of a series of booklets that came out in the early part of the 20th century called the Fundamentals. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of non-dispensationalists who wrote those fundamentals. You had someone like J. Gresham Machen, who fought against the liberal establishment. He was certainly no dispensationalist at all. In fact, he wasn't even a premillennialist. And so you had kind of a community of Bible-believing people who worked together against the liberal establishment of those days. So it wasn't just the dispensationalists and the Moody people and the Scofield people. There were a lot of people in the Reformed camp who stayed together. That's how Westminster Seminary got started in Philadelphia. And other. I went to Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. And so there was this camaraderie between these two groups, but yet a lot of the Reformed people actually came out. O.T. Alice came out with a book called Prophecy in the Church, which was an indictment of dispensationalism. So this debate has been going on for quite some time among Bible-believing Christians.
Hey, before we continue, though, remember, Eden Pure is having their famous BOGO deal on thunderstorm air purifiers as we speak. For those of you like me that went to public school, that's buy one, get one free. No matter how many you buy, you get an equal amount for free. You buy 2, you get 2 free. You buy 5, you get 5 free. The thunderstorm will completely eliminate any odor. I made a boo-boo in the man cave, spilled one of those smelly oil things that my wife likes, and it just reeked. She's like, we need to get the Eden Pure thunderstorm purifier. Gone. Absolutely did the trick again. So buy one, get one free sale is here for a limited time only. Don't wait. Find out for yourself why they've got so many 5-star reviews. EdenPureDeals.com is where you want to go. Use the discount code SteveBogo. Steve Bogo for buy one, get one. Steve Bogo at EdenPureDeals.com. Use the discount code Steve Bogo and have fresher, cleaner air today. EdenPureDeals.com. Discount code Steve Bogo. All right, so to set the stage to talk about the different millennial views took a little bit longer than I thought. So we're going to share that for next segment. And I think that actually is a good setup because it'll also set up the broader cultural conversation here as well and how these particular views have influenced a lot of the church's willingness or lack thereof to engage culturally. So let's close with this, Gary. I've got about 2.5 minutes for you to answer this question. What do you, based on your best understanding of the Bible, what do you believe has to happen for Christ to return?
Oh, wow. Well, I guess one scripture passage, he must reign until he puts all of his enemies under his feet. Of course, I believe Jesus is reigning now. I believe heaven is his throne, the earth is his footstool. He has called on his believing church, the community of believers, to make application of the Bible to every area of life. I believe that one day the gospel will permeate the world. You will see people from all different nations around the world embracing Jesus as the promised Messiah. I think that's happening in many areas of the world right now, even among the Muslim world. I believe there's still a great deal of persecution going on in the world, like we have in Nigeria. Again, I just think that once Christians throw off the garment of eschatological prognostication, that it will transform their lives. And I've run into people. This is real short. You may know who Kirk Cameron is. Kirk Cameron was in the Left Behind movies. He watched a video series that I did a number of years ago, and he will tell you that it transformed his life beyond measure. And what is Kirk Cameron doing today? He's taking on the leftist establishment all across the country, because and he also did a film called Monumental. If that happened, think about this. If Christians finally get on and say, let's lay off this old garment and put on a new garment, I think we could transform the world.
What's fascinating, too, is that Kirk, who endorsed my 2016 book, A Nefarious Plot, that we turned into a movie last year, but Kirk is doing a regular show on TBN. So that's what's that is, one of the leading expositors of premillennial dispensational thought and eschatology in all of American media and Christendom. So you're right.
I hope I don't get him in trouble. Hope I just get him in trouble.
You brought him out of the closet, maybe, Gary. Well, next week, Kirk used to do a show on TBN until Gary DeMar opened his mouth. Yes, appreciate that. So is it suffice to say you don't believe that Jesus is daddy coming back to clean up this massive mess that is beyond our scope, but is coming back to confirm victory, not to actually enact it? Is that fair?
Yes. That's the simplest I could put it, and you put it better than I could. Yes.
Thoughts and prayers to the inbox for this conversation, but I knew it was going to happen when we booked it. Wouldn't have it any other way. All right, so
welcome to my world.
Indeed. So what does premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, what do these things mean? And why does that play into how you may view your mandate to engage culturally or not? We'll get into that with Gary DeMar next. All right, back here with Hour 2 here on a special evergreen edition of the Steve Deace Show. It is new, but it is not live. We taped this early in the year 2024 for the eventuality that we would eventually have to take a day off. Todd Erzin is here alongside Aaron McIntyre. You will both see and hear from them in the final segment of the show, where I'm sure they'll have plenty of reaction to the conversation we're having today with Gary DeMar. And my inbox right now during the break, I could feel it pleading with me, do not do this. But I'm a glutton for punishment, so we will anyway. You can let us know what you think about what we think via the stevedeace.com inbox. Just email us, steve@stevedeace.com, although I will say I'm wincing because I know what's coming. steve@stevedeace.com. You can also like us on Facebook, me, we, and Gab. Follow me at Steve Deace Show on Twitter, Getter, Instagram, and TikTok. And don't forget the last name is DEACE, although it wouldn't be too bad if you forgot it this time. If you listen to the podcast, thank you very much. Please leave us a 5-star review if you like us. Thank you to the thousands of you that have done that already. Please also hit subscribe, or in the case of iTunes, follow. That way, every time we do a new show, it will show up in your feed every single time, even if you regret it later. Like I know some of you will regret this episode. But it's a conversation. Hey, I'm a victim. All right? I just had one of my radio mentors gave me one of this guy's books one time. Jan Michelson gave me one of these guy's books. I read it. I should have known better. Jan's one of the few great men I've ever known, but everybody misses the mark every now and then. This is one piece of his advice I shouldn't have taken. All right, and it led me down a bunch of rabbit holes, and you guys have wanted us to have this conversation for how many years, Todd, have we gotten this request? Do a show like this, right? Okay, all right.
A couple of times, yes.
And to be fair, a couple years ago, we did do a show where we did go in depth for an evergreen on the dispensational futurist view. We did do that,
yes.
Right? Okay. So now it's time for the counter view as well. All right. So you're getting that today with author, theologian Gary DeMar. You can check him out at AmericanVision.org. He's got a host of books at Amazon. One in particular that I would recommend because it was a huge positive influence on me. Myths, Lies, and Half-Truths, How Misreading the Bible Neutralizes Christians. All right, so let's welcome Gary back into the conversation. Let's pick right up, Gary, where we left off then. All right, the three views of prevalent views of eschatology. For those, again, who don't know what that means, it means the theology or study of the end of days or the end of time. All right, the three dominant views: premillennialism, postmillennialism, and amillennialism. Can you define for us each of these? And then they have distinctions within each of them as well, particularly the premill view. Are you post-trib, pre-trib, mid-trib? All right, so let's start with premillennialism. What is it?
Well, it's all based upon Revelation 20, where it talks about 1,000 years, which comes out to be a millennium. Although Revelation 20 doesn't actually describe what we think of as a millennium. But somebody who is premillennial believes that Jesus is going to return before the 1,000 years, thus the pre. The postmillennialist believes Jesus is going to return at the end of the 1,000 years, thus the post. The amillennialist also believes that Jesus is going to return at the end of the 1,000 years, but he doesn't believe that Revelation 20 actually describes a millennium. The premillennialist says that Jesus is going to reign on the earth for 1,000 years, that the temple is going to be reestablished, there'll be animal sacrifices, circumcision will be reinstituted, and so forth, and that Jesus will reign on the earth for 1,000 years and so forth. Although Revelation 20 doesn't say anything about that as well. So those are the three millennial positions based upon Revelation 20.
Within the premill view, there is pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib. What do those terms mean?
Okay, anybody who is a pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib refers to the rapture, which precedes the 1,000 years. And it's supposed to be that's a 7-year period, which is based on Daniel chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. That last week of years, the 70th week is 7 years. And if you believe in a pre-tribulational rapture, you believe that Jesus will take the church off the earth before the 7 years. So pre-tribulational. If you believe that Jesus...
That's the Left Behind book view, by the way. That's
the Left Behind book view, exactly.
Yeah.
Left Behind books view. Then if you believe that Jesus is going to rapture his church after the terrible, terrible tribulation that's going to take place, where the slaughter of Jews and billions of people around the world, you believe in a post-tribulational view that Christians will go through the tribulation. So those are the two popular views, although there's a mid-tribulational view, and the newest view is called a pre-wrath view, which says that Jesus will rapture his church just prior to the pouring out of God's wrath near the end of that 7-year period.
But before we finish up with what we were just discussing, a reminder, great time of year to get the new show swag here for the Steve Deace Show, and the Blaze was kind enough to let us take a hand this time in articulating and forming our latest round of imaging for the show. And you see right there the candle, the light shining in the darkness. with the Truth Be Told slogan there. You can get that on our new hoodies, our new T-shirts. It looks really sharp. They've got the stuff we came out with a couple of summers ago as well, with the Ruth Bader Ginsburg pro-life hero, unintended, of course. And we could not have overturned Roe without her. So you can get all this kind of stuff, and not just for our show, but all the shows here at The Blaze. If you go to shopblazemedia.com, shopblazemedia.com, use the code Steve10 to get 10% off your entire order. The code Steve10 to get 10% off your entire order. When you go to shopblazemedia.com, do it today. This 1,000 years, is it a figurative period of time in your view? Is it a literal period of time? When does it take place? What instigates it?
Oh, wow. The premillennialist says it's a literal 1,000 years. And the problem with that view is you've got the book of Revelation, which you have 144,000. You have a beasts. You have a dragon with a tail. You have a giant woman and hanging out in space. You got all this figurative language. And the number 1,000 in Scripture, when it's used, is often used figuratively. And you also read in the book of Revelation about this horde of opposers of the things of Christ are like the sand of the seashore. So you got this hyperbole there. So both the amillennialist and the postmillennialist simply means it's a long period of time. There are preterists, however, who see that Revelation 20, that number 1,000, is simply a number dealing with the intensity of something. That Jesus's reign was taking place during that period between AD 30 and AD 70, where he is ruling from heaven, and he's overseeing the work of the church during that particular period of time. So there's a lot of disagreement on the nature and the length of that 1,000-year period. But basically, pre-mills believe it's literal, all-mills, post-mills believe it's just simply a long period of time. God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. One day in the court of the Lord is better than 1,000 days anywhere else. Some say it just simply means the day of the Lord. Peter says in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 8, one day to the Lord is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years to a day. 1,000 years simply may mean the day of the Lord, where God is overseeing these events leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70.
Studying these various views as a guy who's just smart enough to be dangerous with this stuff, I found many of the arguments from people in your camp very compelling and answering the challenges of the predominant premillennial dispensational view. And our audience knows that when we have talked about this in the limited times we have, because it does make people crazy. But in the minimal times we have, I've communicated that. But I've also communicated the one spot with your side's view that I struggle with is now when we get to the topic of an antichrist. It does, again, because I take the Bible literally. And when Paul is speaking to the people, the church in Thessalonica, he is clearly talking about a future person, a future man of lawlessness. All right, that this is not some. So this is to me, I think this is the one area that I'm unsure of the most when it comes to your side's view is when we start talking about who's the Antichrist or the man of lawlessness that Paul is talking about.
Okay, very, very good. I wrote a number of books, but the book that covers almost all of this material is Last Days Madness, and you can get this at AmericanVision.org. And I have 2 chapters in my book, Last Days Madness, on 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. And I also have a chapter in there on the Antichrist. So let's do the Antichrist first, because I think that's simpler. What is a biblical definition of Antichrist? I always ask this question: what is the biblical definition of Antichrist? Well, the biblical definition of Antichrist is, guess where it's found? It's in the Bible. And the biblical definition of Antichrist is somebody who denies that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh.
Right. That's one of John's. That's the Apostle John's epistles at the end of the New Testament. Yeah.
Right. 2 John 7. Now look at 1 John 2:18. I have to put my other glasses on here. Do this and make sure I get this right, even though I kind of know this by memory. Listen, again, you're reading the Bible for the first time. No preconceptions. 1 John chapter 2, verse 18. Children, it is the last hour. Now, he's addressing a particular audience here. He has a particular audience. He wrote this to a group of people in his day. Children, it is the last hour. And just as you heard that Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have arisen. From this we know that it is the last hour. And verse 22, who is the liar but the one who denies that Jesus is the Christ? This is the Antichrist, the one who denies the Father and the Son. So what do we know by this? An Antichrist is someone who denies that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. Who denied that Jesus Christ had come in the flesh that audience would have understood and known? It was the unbelieving Jews. Those are the ones who rejected Jesus as the promised Messiah. And in fact, John calls them the synagogue of Satan in Revelation chapter 2:9 and Revelation 3:9. There wasn't a single Antichrist. There were Antichrists. There were many of them. And notice the timing here. John says, it's the last hour, friends, which in John's epistles are typically said to have been written late, leading up to the events of the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. John's not describing some end-time political religio figure here. He is describing what was taking place, which you could read in the book of Acts, where the Jews were opposing Christians and actually were once again trying to work with the Romans in order to crucify, well, in one sense, metaphorically, crucify the Apostle Paul and shut the gospel down. Mm-hmm. This is not describing something in the distant future at all. And then you get to 2 Thessalonians, and traditionally, it's interesting in 2 Thessalonians that if you study the reformers, they believed that the Roman papacy was in fact the man of lawlessness. Now we request you, brethren, with regard to the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him, and I don't have time to go through all that. I'm going to try to get to the timing of this, that you not be quickly shaken from your composure or be disturbed either by a spirit or a message or a letter as if from us to the effect that the day of the Lord has come. This day of the Lord here must have been related to the destruction of Jerusalem that they were told about and the ramifications of that. Because how in the world would they have thought that they had gotten a letter from the Apostle Paul if this was the rapture of the church or the second coming? It makes absolutely no sense.
And all this brings us back to, and I've said to our audience, people need to understand early on, Christianity is an explicitly Jewish argument. I've said this to the audience many times. So we have Jews arguing with Jews about whether Yeshua of Nazareth is Messiah or not. It's an explicitly Jewish argument, all right? And so, And I mean, literally, it's a family squabble, for lack of a better description. And that's why I go back to one of the first questions I asked you. When do you believe Revelation was written? I think you would you say that if it could be certifiably proven that it was written in 90 or 95 AD, would that change your perspective from a preterist at all to more of a futurist one?
I wouldn't, because
you wouldn't? Okay.
No, because it's very simply because there's an idealist approach that the events of the book of Revelation are actually would affect every single generation out there, and that's a very popular view as well.
Yeah.
So this man of lawlessness that Paul mentions here was alive in Paul's day. Let no one in any way deceive you, for it will not come unless the apostasy comes first, John just described the apostasy. There were some who were of us and went out from us, showing that they were never really of us. And the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself above every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat to worship. Takes his seat in the temple of God. Well, the temple was still standing, displaying himself as being God. Do you not remember that while I was with you, I was telling you the things? And now listen to verse 6. And you know what restrains him now, so that in his time he may be revealed. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now restrains will do so until he is taken out of the way. So whoever the man of lawlessness was, he was alive in Paul's day, and he was being restrained in Paul's day. Now, there's some people say this is Nero, refers to Nero. Some people believe it refers to maybe the high priest in the temple, the man of lawlessness, who goes into the temple. Remember, the temple was rebuilt. It was dedicated again in the early 1960s. In the 60s, animal sacrifices would have been instituted and so forth. And so they think this was the high priest who was defiling the temple with animal sacrifices, taking his seat in the temple. That was something the high priest, did not do. So this person was actually, by taking his seat in the temple, he was actually declaring himself to be kind of the vicar of what their view of the Messiah was. And so whatever position you come to on 2 Thessalonians 2, the man of lawlessness was already alive in Paul's day, because Paul says, you know what restrains him now. He was being restrained in Paul's day. And people say, oh, well, that's the Holy Spirit restraining the Antichrist. Seems to me, if that's what all Paul was saying here, I don't know why he says, well, the Holy Spirit is restraining the Antichrist. He doesn't say that at all. And if the Antichrist, as defined by John in John's epistles, 1 John and 2 John, and if this refers to religious leaders, then this refers to religious leaders. And who was restraining them? Read the book of Acts. Who was restraining the apostate Jews in the book of Acts? It was the Roman government that was. And so a lot of people believe that the restrainer here is actually Claudius, who was keeping these zealot Jews, these insurrectionists, from destroying what eventually did take place with the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, coming up against the Romans.
Meaning causing the revolt against Rome is what you're talking about.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, that ended up leading to the destruction of Jerusalem.
Right.
So you don't believe Revelation 13 points to a future Antichrist who will emerge. You don't believe any of that kind of stuff of a future satanic kingdom, a battle at Armageddon, the Valley of Megiddo. You don't believe in any of that stuff.
I believe bad things happen in the world. They aren't necessarily tied to Bible prophecy. Revelation 13, there are two beasts. One comes up out of the sea. That's probably Rome. One comes up out of the land. That's probably Israel. They collude against the church. The number 666 can refer to Nero, Neron Kaiser in Hebrew letters, which spells out 666. And another interesting part of all of this, if you go to 1 Kings chapter 10, you have Solomon, where every number that's used there is a round number. And the only number that deals with the amount of gold talents he has is 666. And in the very next chapter, he marries all these foreign women in order to consolidate his very pagan kingdom. And so that number 666 could refer both to the sea beast and the land beast, and refers to events of that particular generation.
Let's fast forward now in the final 8 or 9 minutes we have to the time in which we live today. Make this applicable to our audience about why you think this stuff matters if you're a Christian, and how you choose to live your life now, and what you do or do not choose to prioritize now.
There is no escape clause. There's not going to be a rescue in the rapture. Now, once you determine that that's the case, you've got to get busy. The left has understood eschatology better than we have. There was a book that was written, it's over 1,000 pages, by Francis Nigel Lee back in the 1970s, called Communist Eschatology. Every worldview has an eschatology. The Muslims have an eschatology. Christians used to have a vibrant eschatology. You mentioned the Pilgrims and the Puritans and even the Reformers before them. Vishal Mangalwalde wrote a book a number of years ago published by Thomas Nelson, The Book That Made Your World. We would not have what we have or what we had in the West if it hadn't been for Christians who believed that God's kingdom, that the efforts of the Pilgrims and the Puritans was simply a stepping stone to greater things. That's why they started Harvard and Yale and started what is today Princeton and Columbia University and all these educational institutions, because they believed in the future. That's why they built these huge cathedrals that stand today, because they believed in the future. We turn our buildings into recreational centers and basketball courts and so forth, rather than training grounds. We send our kids to public schools. We turn our children over to the very people who hate everything we believe. 90% of Christians send their kids to public schools. Again, I just think that what needs to happen is a reevaluation of this particular topic, and also the reevaluation of the idea that the world is not evil in and of itself. That God created the world and he said it was good, even because of sin, that you find that it's good. Well, Paul says this in I think it's 1 Timothy chapter 4, that whatever God created is good if it's devoted to prayer. So change your eschatology, change your idea of the future, change the way that you view the world, and you'll transform the world. It's not that difficult.
I mentioned earlier, you have done these kinds of debates all over the country for many, many years, including with some names, if you are into prophecy, people would know. What's the best argument you've encountered in opposition to your view?
Boy, that's a tough one. Let me just put it this way. I have not encountered a biblical argument against the view that I espouse, and other people have espoused before me. This isn't something I've made up. This isn't new to me. It's probably the difficulty of believing the way the world is right now that it could be transformed. That's probably my biggest impediment for this view. And I have to slap myself periodically to wake up from that, because I know enough history to see what has happened in history and what we've come out of. You look at Tokyo today, and go back when the bombing of Tokyo was obliterated, Hiroshima and so forth, and go over there and look to see what has happened, and you find that Japan competes with us, at least in the automobile industry, has done that for years. So two world wars last century. It's at the one hand, it's the difficult of the task. And at the same time, I'm looking at the reality of what God can do if he puts his mind to doing it, and we simply sit down and obey what he has to say, no matter how difficult the circumstances may be.
Is it an oversimplification to say that throughout its history, the church has collectively often espoused an eschatological view that's sort of lined up with the level of resistance or its place in history at the time? The early church, for example, all the various persecution they were facing, both the internal spat, the Jewish versus Jewish internal spat, but then externally from the state of Rome at the same time. So the idea that this is ending now, Christ is returning now, we're fulfilling this prophecy now. We fast forward a few hundred years and we get to Augustine, and now and through Constantine, and the church has gone from being tolerated to being endorsed and actually boosted by Rome. And so now we have the introduction of amillennialism and the city of God and the city of man, and these kingdoms that'll coexist until Christ comes back at the end to separate the sheep and the goat. We fast forward now through the Dark Ages. We get through and we get through a civil war. We get through World War I, World War II, and we discussed that the Plymouth Brethren view of futurism was older than that. But now this really begins to gather steam as the idea of weapons of mass destruction, global conquest, global messaging becomes prevalent. Am I going somewhere with this, or is this an oversimplification of the ebbs and flows of this debate for the last 2,000 years?
Well, I mean, think about look at the first century. You have all the apostles were martyred to a certain extent. They were persecuted. There was the persecution that took place prior to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD with Christians. Try to sell postmillennialism to them back then, but obviously the church continued because they believed beyond their own circumstances. And Steve, I just think that's where we are in many. I think one of the reasons we have this kind of woke, whining, safe space culture today, they don't see difficulties as a way to grow in strength and assurance. They see it as an impediment to life. And I'll take my father, for example. He was in World War II. He was at Schofield Barracks, kind of funny, Schofield Barracks, on December 7th, 1941, when Pearl Harbor took place. He served in the Pacific. He served in Korea, had his right leg blown off in the Korean War. And I have to say, my father never let those things. He was foster cared for a number of years when he was very, very young. I never heard him whine or complain about anything. He never used any of his handicap as an excuse for anything. And maybe that's why I'm just kind of built different from the way a lot of other people are built, because I lived it. I saw what the difficulties of life, are with lots of people and how they get through it and create great, great things as a result of it. And I just think it's all there. And we just have to embrace what God has called us to do. And on the basis of that, we'll be success.
Let's just take a second here before we continue on with the conversation. And remember, election is coming up. And that also means, well, really outside of Elon Musk's X, censorship is coming up as well and will be on the increase. How dare you defy the statist Democrat Party narrative? Freedom of speech, government collusion for censorship. We've seen all those things. One way to make sure you always get our content is to subscribe to Blaze TV. First of all, you get original programming that's top-notch, that is out of the reach of big tech censorship. But then you can also know that you'll never have to get up one day and say, today's the day that Apple pulled the plug. Today's the day Spotify pulled the plug. All right, get 20% off of your annual subscription with the code Steve right now at blazetv.com. Use the code Steve right now for $20 off your subscription at blazetv.com. Use the code Steve for $20 off today at blazetv.com. Gary DeMar, I can't thank you enough. My inbox hates you. I know that's true. But this is what we asked for, and you gave us what we asked for, and greatly appreciate the time today, brother. This has been fascinating to hear a viewpoint that not a lot of other Christians have heard. And again, thank you very much. You can follow his work at AmericanVision.org. He posts commentaries there constantly, has written numerous books on these subjects that you can go and find all of them at Amazon.com as well. I appreciate you, Gary. Thank you very much for the time today.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you having me on.
You bet. Thank you. Oh, boy. That did not disappoint. And my inbox is very disappointed and will probably be very disappointed for the foreseeable future. But hey, a lot of you asked for this. What are these other views? I want to know what they are. Now you know. And we'll find out what Todd and Aaron know and what they think when we come back.
The Steve Deace Show.
Is it too late to come up with a new idea? Can we just re-rack this and change of plans? No?
You might want to do that before I talk.
All right. Oh boy. But before we finish up with what we were just discussing, a reminder, great time of year. to get the new show swag here for the Steve Deace Show, and the Blaze was kind enough to let us take a hand this time in articulating and forming our latest round of the imaging for the show. And you see right there the candle, the light shining in the darkness. With the Truth Be Told slogan there. You can get that on our new hoodies, our new t-shirts. It looks really sharp. They've got the stuff we came out with a couple of summers ago as well, with Ruth Bader Ginsburg, pro-life hero, unintended, of course. And we could not have overturned Roe without her. So you can get all this kind of stuff, and not just for our show, but all the shows here at The Blaze. If you go to shopblazemedia.com, shopblazemedia.com, use the code Steve10 to get 10% off your entire order. The code Steve10 to get 10% off your entire order. When you go to shopblazemedia.com, do it today. Ask and ye shall receive. All right? People have been asking for this, and so today you got it. And Gary is very smart, and no doubt about it. So let's find out what a couple of other smart guys happen to think. Todd and Aaron, you have listened to this now for the last 90 minutes. The floor is yours. What do you think?
You should pick first. Aaron, do you want me to go first or last?
Let's go last. Let's have you go last.
Okay.
I was saying during the break, I wish I could have had a running thought bubble over Todd's head throughout that entire conversation, and we're going to get it here in just a few moments. So my biggest problem with, as it currently stands, pre-millennial, pre-trib, which is the dominant viewpoint amongst American Protestantism, is that it has the opposite effect that it should have on the way we do things in the here and now, meaning this. If you believe that Jesus' return is imminent, if you believe that the rapture is imminent, that should actually all the more encourage you and motivate you to build God's kingdom now. Because for the unbelieving world, tick, 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 time is running out on them.
This might even be the terminal generation.
It might be.
Yeah.
So you better get busy building God's kingdom because time's running out for them. Okay? But it has the opposite effect. We had an earlier Evergreen episode, and I talked about seeing the fruit in a particular view of theology, and it was the one that we did with Greg Locke. And I would just say that the fruit that I see from pre-mill, pre-trib, is that, well, things are just going to get worse. It lends itself very much to a defeatist, very much to just a viewpoint that there's nothing we can do. And I know that's maybe not the stated belief, but man, that doesn't align with the heart of God in my mind. I just don't think it does. So I'm not rejecting that altogether. I will say this. After hearing, and does he have some strong opinions and some strong beliefs when it comes to eschatology, Mr. DeMar? Yeah, and you heard them. I will say I never quite realized how convoluted that pre-trib, pre-mill, especially just pre-mill, can seem and is, in my opinion, until that conversation. It is very, very, very convoluted, I will say that. So those are kind of my big picture takeaways coming out of that conversation. I just underscore this. Regardless, and I think this would be a good thing to end my thoughts on. Theology and eschatology is a part of theology. The study of the things of God, or the study of God, it is only profitable inasmuch as it draws us closer to the heart of God. Mm-hmm. We do not have these conversations just to have warring tribes within a broader tribe. We don't do it just for fun. We are trying in our best ways, even as fallen human beings with fallen minds and fallen understandings, we are doing our best to get ourselves closer to the heart of God. I hope that's the motivation listening. I hope that's the posture of your heart listening to these conversations, and I'm trying my best as well.
Todd.
So in doing both with Greg Locke and here with Gary DeMar, are you purposely picking the Protestants that are going to confirm all of my priors? Because this has been awesome.
Well, keep in mind, Greg Locke is first up in the evergreen rotation. It might be 6 months between when people heard that and when people, it might be a week. We don't know when those are going to air. But on purpose, I did try to have us get a wide swath and diversity of opinion on various topics from people of different camps and sectors within Christianity.
Well, again, I don't know anything Gary DeMar has said about Catholicism, about anything. I purposely come to this man on this topic because I want to take it all that that was fascinating. The history that he brings to us is stuff that I've studied, both into the origins of premill in the 19th century, the significance of 666, where that comes from, the fact of who the Antichrist is back during the time of the early church. And when we talk about the Antichrist on the show, we talk about who could it be, because when things go bad, do I believe there's a person that could fit the bill now, just like did back then, but is the one we're talking about? Why I have no talking about the Antichrist. I've never uniquely believed that is the Antichrist. I don't know. Again, that's a very Catholic voice you heard from Gary DeMar in my estimation. And I would just say this, this is what my instinct has always been about this, but in the conversations we've had, I've never quite felt it was my place. And you know that I say this out of love for my Protestant brothers in the show. You treat me mostly, even though I complain about the ones who say, I love you, Todd, but just because you're Catholic, you're going to hell. Even some of you I love, but most of you, as a Catholic, we don't believe. It's not just me, the Catholic. The Catholic Church doesn't believe just because you're a Protestant, you're going to hell. No, these two brothers next to me, they inspire me every day. Their love for Jesus is an absolute ticket to heaven. But I do believe this about premillennial dispensationalism now firmly. I'll just say that I'll put it out there now. It's pretty much where I've been. But now that we're all in this hearing together, it is a deception.
Wow.
It is a deception. And Gary DeMar, he put all that meat on that bone. But it is a deception that, again, it's only 150-ish years old.
Yeah. I have a lot of respect for, the late great Tim LaHaye did a ton of work for the Christian church beyond what he's most known for, which is eschatology, but he did a lot of other great work, apologetics, was one of the pioneers for Christian counseling and things of that nature. But one of the arguments that he used to make all the time is that this is what the early church believed. He is correct, but with all due respect to him and his legacy, not for the reasons I believe that he is saying, meaning that they believed that they were in the fulfillment of that time. Yes, they did believe these things were all going to happen in the future, but it's because they believed that future was in their generation, because Jesus looked at him and said, there's not one person's going to pass away until these things are fulfilled.
Yes.
All right. And so this is why in 70 AD, if you want to look at some of the traditional, outside of the theological argument that was very testy. And yes, the first century non-Messianic Jewish leaders often did not treat Christians well. Christians, the rest of the time throughout the centuries, have often not treated Jews well. Okay, so no one gets a gold star for loving your neighbor as you love yourself in the Jewish Christian argument over whether Yeshua is Messiah in the 2,000 years of total history. Fair? No one's camp is walking out of there with no cringe moments or embarrassments or are bad. Wish the ancestors wouldn't have pulled that one. Okay, but if beyond that, a lot of the rift comes from 70 AD, because the Jewish Christians, when they saw the abomination of desolation, when they saw Titus's forces enter into the courtyard of the temple and desecrate it, they thought that's what Christ was talking about, and they left. Yeah. They fled to Petra. Okay, the non-Messianic Jewish Christians said, "Hey, that's our covenantal nationalistic identity." They stayed and they fought. And that was a bone of contention within those camps for many, 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 many years. Go ahead.
Well, there's just the theme that I love how he draws out is just, and Protestants very much are famous for this, but I take the Bible literally. Steve, you even said as much. But Gary pointed out,
I think the Bible is the literal word of God. That doesn't mean I take everything literally.
Right, but the term comes up all the time. Yeah. And Gary said, it's really important that we do. And he says, I see you and I raise you. That was his, here's the words. Mm-hmm. Here's the context. When they used in this and this and this, he wasn't somehow weaving through the raindrops. He believes that too. Mm-hmm. And it just goes to, again, when I say as a Catholic, this is the thing. On Protestantism, once one group stepped out, and then it just keeps, it's like those goblets in Harry Potter in the movie where he touches one piece of metal and it just keeps building and building and building. Gary was like, I am taking it literal. These words are not even particularly complex. They mean this. You are having to do all kinds of dances to make it mean what you say it's meaning.
So just to put, my understanding is Catholics traditionally, going back to Augustine, your view is the all-millennial view. These two kingdoms that kind of exist until the end of time,
Gary
essentially.
Spent almost zero time making a distinction between postmillennial and amillennial. He said, it's not that there's not a difference, but these are very first cousins compared to the two related.
That is true too. That is true too. And the postmillennial view would essentially say the city of God conquers the city of man. That's essentially what it would say. And that's the view the Puritans had. And there would be no United States of they when they write in the, doesn't mean you have to agree, doesn't mean you have to think that that's the most eschatologically, theologically precise. I'm not arguing now. I'm not arguing hermeneutics. I'm arguing history. All right. I'm not arguing that their hermeneutics were correct. I'm saying historically it is a fact that it was that belief that drove them to come here. That's why they wrote in the Mayflower Compact to establish for the advancement of the kingdom of the Christian religion. And then right after and in that document is a governing compact. Okay, that was their intent. Their intent was to live the biblical law in the natural world, or what sometimes gets referred to as theonomy. All right, that was their intent. That's not even in dispute. That's not a debate. That you can debate whether their hermeneutics were right, but that was the history. It was the history that the early church thought that it was living in the last days. That is true. All right, these things are historically true. After that, and then we get into the hermeneutic aspect of things. I mean, there were other things I wanted to ask him about. Daniel's statue, for example. One of the things that's always troubled me, even when I held on to the premill dispensational view because I'd not heard any other views. One of the things that brought me to Christianity, and this is why, I kid, but the Left Behind books have a special place in my heart. My mother-in-law gave me one. And when I was unsaved and I read it, and it just completely blew my mind. I mean, because I could see the world reacting to an event like the rapture exactly the way it was portrayed in that book, True, but Gary nailed talking about that. It's much more exciting and fanciful to think about that something's going to happen in the future. Yeah. We feel like we might be part of a superhero book. Honestly, that works on us.
Yes.
That is part of it. I agree. But one of the things that struck me when I was into that viewpoint that I was troubled by is when you go through Daniel's statue, you can see clearly every empire conquered the other. I never understood why there had to be a reconstituting of the Roman Empire or where that came from, because the Roman Empire was conquered by Islam. All right? Islam conquered the Roman Empire. What was the end of the Byzantine Empire? All right? What was its end? To the Ottomans at Constantinople. So I didn't understand that. That's the part that I always found to be kind of, because it seemed to me the Bible is written Jerusalem-centric more than Eurocentric, And so I didn't really understand why the Roman Empire got a resurrection and none of the rest of these empires did. Well, why not have a resurrection of the Medio-Persia? Why don't we do that? It didn't make any sense to me. All these other empires were conquered, and so Rome was conquered. Those are other questions I wanted to ask that we just ran out of time to explore. Although I'm thinking Gary's answers might be, I don't think that's even relevant given what my overall view happens to be. I having heard both sides' arguments, my position still is pretty much the same. That I am skeptical. I still think the strongest argument is the futuristic argument about what an antichrist or a man of lawlessness is. I mean, Gary himself said that he thought that and you and I've talked about this before. We talked about this when we did the shows during back in 2017 for the 500th anniversary of the Reformation, that the reformers believed Rome was the whore of Babylon or the beast out of the sea. Some of them did. Well, that would indicate then that they didn't think that Nero was the antichrist. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That they had a futuristic view. You know what that one to me is not as cut and dried, because there are a lot of traditions within Christianity that don't hold to the premill dispensational view, that have believed in a future notion of an all-powerful, well, not all-power, all-encompassing is a better way of putting it, an all-encompassing global evil, guided by Satan himself. That did not start with the Plymouth Brethren.
Right.
Lots of other things did, but that's not one of them that did.
Instead of an eschatology, I think we can just call that hating Catholics, is what that is.
Well, for the reformers, that would have been a part of it, yeah. And that hatred, frankly, was often returned the other way.
Yes.
So, yes. Yeah. So, again, that's another chapter where no one's tribe is walking out of there thinking, nailed that one. All right, we treated everybody great. Jesus is proud. No one's walking out of that one just giving each other, Cheerios to snack on and helmet stickers,
I have a question. Do you notice how nobody ever asks what the Beijing church's view of eschatology is, or the church or Nigeria's view of eschatology is?
That's an interesting point. Yeah. I see what you're doing there. I agree with you.
Well, Are you saying this stuff is born out of comfort, Aaron?
Yeah, we are uniquely offered the
it's really
privilege of debating this.
It's really easy in the West to say the world is not getting better. But are you more likely to be born into a Christian household per capita in Beijing or Boston?
Yeah.
Beijing, actually.
Now, I am a staunch pro-Israel guy for not necessarily prophetic reasons. And I've always been honest about that. It's because for me, they're our ally there. They're our one true ally. They have the one commonality of Judeo-Christian ethic with the West. And, and I'm pretty staunchly pro-Jewish. I mean, I go to church every Sunday and worship a Jew. So I don't think you have to believe in premillennial eschatology to have those views, because I would be someone that would apply to. So, well, hopefully this was worth everybody's while. Romans 8:28.